episode 123, of Genn and Millie, where a Gen Xer and millennial share the strength-based perspective through which they view the world. We are your hosts, Allison and Tess. Hi, Tess.
Hi, Allie.
It is March 18th, the day after the Patrick Day. Did you celebrate?
No.
Did you celebrate over the weekend?
No.
Okay. All right.
Lots of comments on that I kind of want to keep to myself.
Okay. Well, I did go to a parade, which is right on brand. And it's my first parade here in Denver, and I love a good parade because I love a marching band. And what I noticed is there were maybe 3. And the parade went on for 3 hours, and there were
Only
maybe
3
marching bands.
Oh, I'm so sorry for you. That's
Yes. I feel like it's an indication of change in a lot of ways. But it was super disappointing. I love a good drum cadence. And so I thought of that as an intro. A drum cadence helps motivate me.
Yeah. That's great.
My
I love that.
Circle makes a square on. Sorry that I brought up St. Patrick's Day.
It's not like it's fine if people celebrate. There's just a lot of, I think, problematic things that are associated with the Irish and fetishizing ethnic holidays, which,
yes.
things like that we could go into a whole bunch of social commentary that I don't know that listeners want to hear from me because they always hear that from me. So, But anyway, one of the things that I thought of in between, or something that came across my social media feed that I sent to you, but was like, I need to share this because, obviously I'm in a different generation, a relatively younger generation than you, but I felt so old when this came across my social media feed. It was, I think originally a tweet, but it came across my Instagram from Victoria Hanneman, whose handle is @TaxLawProf. And they wrote, there is a lot to process with this new parental verification on my child's iPad. And then they included a picture of their child's iPad in which it asked for some sort of parental verification or parental, parent is required is what it says. And it has an age check question. So the age check question that's provided is, what is a VCR? And it's a multiple choice question, and the options are wild.
I love the options.
First one is curing a headache. Or what is a VCR used for is the question, right? First one, curing headache. 2.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good, if only.
Yeah.
Keeping people safe. Number 2. 3 is playing videotapes. And 4 is heating up food. So I'm from the VCR generation. That's the content. That's how I consumed content growing up for most of all of my elementary and part of my middle school. And then middle school into high school is when CDs and DVDs became more of a thing. So I looked at that, though, and was like, what on earth? And then was thinking a lot about how older forms of technology have had lots of resurgences. Like we've seen people continue and even resurge with DVDs and Blu-rays. We've seen, of course, vinyl had a little bit of an ebb, but now is in flow again. And so, but we haven't seen that with VCRs. So I literally took a second. I was like, why wouldn't, it would make sense that people don't know, like younger people don't know what VCRs are. And it made me curious if there might be a resurgence of VCRs soon.
It's timely for that question, or for that question towards parent notification or parent permission, or however you worded that. You worded it much better. Parent permissions on technology. I was going through pictures for my friend Jeremy turned 50, and I was going through pictures to post for his birthday, and in the tote, and this massive tote of old stuff, old photos, are a bunch of videos VCR videos from when the kids were little. I have no ability to play these, right? And so they sit there, and I think, here's this whole piece of their life that if I don't figure out a way to, and I know I need to probably have it updated to DVD. Who has a DVD player? No one that I know. Yeah. I know I need to do something with that before they become completely obsolete or completely, wrecked by just age. But I was looking at them thinking, I used to look back a lot because I had the tech to do it. And now to look back, it requires a tote, and for me to go through a tote, or for me to look on Facebook, or my Time Hop. And Time Hop will only take me back, the amount of time that I've had something essentially on my phone. Yeah. So I used to go back a lot more. We used to pop those videos in quite a bit when we had the technology to do it. And now it's like, and I wonder if that's given me less of a frame of reference or more of freedom of future.
Interesting.
I mean, I just don't have a lot of capacity to look back at the evidence of the past in my technology. And that would be true for, I would say, the majority of my generation and parents my age. Yeah. Their kiddos are, approaching this time frame. And it's come up recently because I had some pictures of the kids. Sean and Shanna got engaged, and we had a wonderful celebration, which was awesome. But I was putting together, just some pictures, and the pictures look ancient compared to, now. And I'm like, well, God, it wasn't that long ago. He's going to be 25 here coming up. So VCRs do, in a lot of ways, help people feel safe. I could have answered that question that way.
In some ways, they could cure headaches, i.e., get your kids in front of a VCR as your headache, so they don't bother you anymore.
There's a lot of those pieces from one generation to the next that, I have reels, the projector reels of my dad that my mom gave me. Wow. I don't have a projector. Yeah. But yeah, these are things I should probably take to a technology specialist to save and be able to use. And, it's kind of like Chevy Chase in Christmas Vacation. I remember my parents every once in a while getting that projector reel out, but very, very, very rarely. Whereas I had that VCR tape, we were watching, video of baby Lauren quite a bit because it was ease. Yeah. And now you have a generation of parents that have everything at their fingertips. Yeah. What they did last week they could look at in a second, and what they did 3 years ago they'd still be able to pull up on their phone.
Yeah. And just with it not, in many ways, not being like a scarcity mindset, right? You don't have one roll of film, you don't have a certain, there's only so much length on a VCR strip. Like there's only like I remember like the things that were captured of my childhood were the special moments, like the key moments. And now it's like the everyday, with the ability to record on your phone and take pictures. Like, yes, cloud storage your phone storage, right? But you can buy more for 99 cents, so on and so forth. Right. And so I feel like everything is documented now versus just the documentation of key moments and key activities, which is
taking a little bit of the ritual out of it.
Yeah. So in many ways, you can look up what happened last week, but the likelihood of you doing so, it makes me wonder how often those memories are reviewed. How often we reflect now because we do capture everything. Versus...
It's funny, Lauren sends me often things on Time Hop that are, of me being ridiculous and clumsy and things that they captured. I mean, it's a lot of role reversal. She's like, remember when you showed up like this at the airport? Remember when she sent me a video 2 this week. One was of me standing outside the airport and I have a scarf on and a hat, and she has it on her Snapchat clearly. And the title says, Diane is in the house, because she refers to me as Diane Keaton whenever I wear a hat or a scarf. So she sent that to me this week. And then she also sent me, I was watching the Muppets when the Muppets came back for this short little stint where they had Muppets. And I laughed. So I watch it, and then I hit the rewind and watch it again, and I record it, and you can hear me laughing. And she sent me this, and she's like, this is one of my favorites. And because I'm just laughing at myself, or laughing at what I'm experiencing in the moment. She's more likely to send me memories, probably, than, well, for sure, than Sean, but more than I do. And she's the one with context lower.
Yeah.
I think it's also just, personality.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think current life stage and life moments, right? Like, not just personality, not just strengths, but like where you're at now, I think does a lot to dictate how nostalgic you are for what has been previously.
Right. And it could be a moment of ritual that's coming up, like someone's birthday.
Yeah.
Or an engagement celebration or something like that. I was looking up old photos for when my friend Jeremy and my friend Travis, who both had their 50th recently, when our pool opened in Exeter, like the day that the pool opened was like the best day of the summer. And I've got a picture of the two of them embracing, and they've got their fists in the air like this is they're maybe 5th grade, and their fists are in the air like best day ever. And I shared it on Jeremy's, I posted it on Jeremy's page for his birthday saying party like the pool just opened. And I was thinking about those sort of rituals. You rode your bike to opening day. How wild that is now to look back and think about that ritual of, it was so motivating around the summer. Like, here comes summer. This is our ritual moment. This is what begins the greatest season. So it was in going through that tote that I was able to look back and see the VCR tapes.
I love that. Yeah, I can't tell you the last time I've seen a VCR tape, but I know what it is. It was I remember the day in which my parents got a VCR player in which you can rewind instead of having to take the VCR out and take your pencil and or your pinky and rewind the film manually.
God, that had to take forever.
Oh yeah, it did. But it was worth it to watch
we always
Land
had
Before
a
Time
rewind
again.
option. Oh, Land Before Time. Petrie, right?
It's one of my favorites, yeah.
I think it was Petrie, yeah. Gosh, I forget how young you are.
You know what? I am young, but at the same time, I'm getting old.
Well, that's how that works.
That's how it works. How time works. I know.
That's how it works.
I know. Yeah, it's crazy. It's wild. Ugh. But one of the things, I think the main thing is we always come into this with, what are we going to talk about? Is we don't plan, we don't chat. We spend 10 minutes catching up in the green room and then move into recording. And I think both of us are kind of have had a few recent conversations as this synchronicity thing tends to happen with us. Both have had some conversations recently about kind of everyday life. And the conversations that I've had recently was around, what keeps you motivated to do what you do. If it's a practical tool you use was kind of the context of the questions, like, do you use a specific tool or do you have specific practices? But also it kind of merged into like a larger conversation of just motivations in general, like what keeps you doing what you're doing. And then your conversation was a lot around systems, right? Like what sort of procedures does one have in place that kind of gives rhythms and rituals to their everyday life? So I think we wanted to chat a bit about that today.
Here we are 3 months into the new year and past, all the resolutions and the big excitement about I'm going to lose 20 pounds and I'm going to do this and I'm going to run a race and I'm going to, some of us on this call have gotten some major shit done in the last couple of months. The rest of us have maybe gone the other way. I was going to say, get my dissertation done. And you did.
I did.
So I think motivation is, and it's also really timely too, Tess, when we think about what we talked about in the green room. Once you get to that big moment, how do you continue to have motivation for what's next? And how do you continue to have systems in place that you can copy paste that motivation system, so when you have the next big project on your mind, which, I mean, how many dissertations, maybe how many books, how many professor test moments will there be? Lots, I think. But I mentioned that I ask a lot of my coaching clients about their systems and what systems do you have in place, that you use daily or that help you. And people get really hung up on that question of what systems, because I think they see it as, what app am I using? What do you mean? Or what does my company use for time tracking? That's not why I'm asking that. I'm more curious as to what your systems are for motivation, but also systems around celebration. So how are you tracking what works well and what doesn't? Because I think most of us are walking around thinking that we do things in a quirky way that maybe no one else does, and we don't ever talk about it and we don't share about it. If you have listened to Mel Robbins ad nauseum, like I have recently, I mean, this is the key to the Mel Robbins thing. It's simple shit. She's made millions of dollars on just saying simple shit. Like 1, 2, 3, get out of bed. Let them. This whole let them thing. If I get one more text about let them, I'm like, is this all new to everybody? It's not. Innately, healthy boundaries are a positive thing. Like innately we know this, but also textbook psychology tells us a lot of this too. But I think let them is a system. 3, 2, 1, get out of bed is a system. It's also a motivation. So naming some of this, I think, is a good conversation to have.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I also started listening to Amy Poehler. Her new podcast is, now I don't even know the name of it. It's about just hanging out. And she gets on and she says, hey, everybody, I'm not a therapist. We're not going to talk about menopause. I just want to hang. I just want to do some, just bring some joy into the world and good hang. And I listened this morning when I was on the treadmill to her very first episode is an interview with Tina Fey. And they're best of friends. And they just hang out and talk about whatever comes to mind, and it is so joyful and so funny. But the beginning part, Tess, they had she had a bunch of SNL people in this group Zoom, and it was like, what kind of questions should I ask Tina Fey? But she gets on there, and Rachel Dratch, who is Debbie Downer, is a calamity of all calamities. She gets on. She's got cords everywhere. She's running into shit. Her doorbell goes off. It's just like George barking. And she's just apologizing and falling all over herself saying, oh my God, the reason that you're not going to be able to use this is because of me. And it's the gold, actually. And I'm on the treadmill listening to this, and that kind of joy motivates me.
That's awesome.
That kind of fun motivates me. Probably a hell of a lot more than listening to the podcast talking about why it was from an orthopedic surgeon, and why if I don't stop eating sugar, I'm probably, going to gain more weight and also not be able to run anymore. I want to be in some of these pockets and moments of joy. It's a real bitch to get to 50, Tess. There's like an algorithm that doesn't just build in your brain and your body. Your phone also says, oh, by the way, did you know that you're going to have massive bone loss during this time, and you should probably be doing this and this and this and this.
Oh my
you
gosh.
age massively between 45 and 55. Massively.
Okay.
So anyway, that's why I listened to Amy Poehler this morning while I'm trying to tie this all in, and I'm doing a really shitty job. This is my communication at its worst.
Communication input, just like...
Boom. Okay, so the reason I was listening to Amy Poehler is because I needed motivation to be on that treadmill. The reason I was on the treadmill is because I listened to this orthopedic surgeon. Her name is something Wright, Wright, like our friend Sergey. I heard her say you got to get into a rhythm and a system of at least 45 minutes of movement a day. Women in your 50s, you should still be sprinting. You should be lifting heavy. You should be able to do 11 push-ups on your own, not on your knees. I heard that data. It didn't motivate me.
Yeah.
I needed a system to get me there. Data, great. Then I need a system to get me to the actual action. So I think what you just named, which I did a horrible but actual real life example of how my brain works, input communication, it's the data and then some story that gets me in the motivation.
That makes sense. And I will say, I don't want to say that I haven't listened to this podcast from Dr. Wright, but this orthopedic surgeon didn't just presented data in a doomsday way. Right? Presented data in a, you got to do this or else.
It was pretty preachy. It was pretty preachy.
It seems fear-based, which is not a great motivator for most people.
True.
Yeah.
True.
And so you can use data.
I had not thought about that, at how much she did kind of a, do you want to piss yourself in a hospital bed because, no joke, that was part of it.
Everything,
because you've lost your pelvic floor and you've lost your ability to, you broke your hip.
I mean, you're recounting this and I'm like, you're choosing to intake information in this way. We know your body ages as time goes on. That's good to know. It ages even more so in that decade between 45 and 55. We know, and I know that you know, that good habits are needed. So you don't feel the full effects of that aging. So why choose to engage content that elicits these emotions in you, that heightens your stress-based response, when you know it's not a motivating factor?
Because I've been lazy.
So you need to punish yourself for that?
Oh, that's probably a pretty good, fair system for Allison Horn if we were being real about what I've been lazy.
Okay. So this has turned into an interesting conversation because I think your positivity wants to say that joy motivates you. But in actuality, what motivated you to get on that treadmill was fear, not joy.
I'll send you a check.
I'm not a therapist. I am not a
therapist. Tess.
I'm not.
In addition to Professor Tess. But I think you're right. But see, it's in conversations that I actually get to the realness of my life. Yeah. I can sit here and say, oh yeah, it's you asking me the right question or you helping me loop my conversation. You're also so patient with my conversation, my communication loops.
Sometimes.
You know where they're going. I think you see.
I don't know.
I think your context sees the pattern, and you're like, I actually know what this means. No one else does. How about I help?
I don't think my context sees the pattern, but my context knows that even if you don't know where this conversation is going, you're going to find a way to make it go somewhere and to tie it back to where it needs
That's
to go.
my positivity. That's my positivity.
And communication strategic. Like, it's just all of your themes blending so well. Like, my context is like, I know it doesn't see a pattern with where they're going. I'm trying to make sense of this. But I know you well enough, and I have enough evidence to support that you always bring it in for a landing somehow.
I didn't really know that was the landing, that fear motivates me.
Yeah.
However,
that's not where you started.
However, I do think it's a great thing for me to name.
Yeah.
I have received feedback recently about that. And where that puts me. That fear very much puts me below the line.
Yeah.
But below the line is not always a bad place for me. It can ignite the spark that will help me get into those best practices to put myself back above the line.
Yeah. And I think, like, fear is not psychosocially, physiologically a great motivator, right? It adds stress, it adds certain things, but it is a motivator. It's a very strong motivator for a lot of people. I think in a very, very simple term, in some ways, deadlines are fear-based tactics because you're worried about what will happen if you don't meet those deadlines. If it's your boss thinks differently of you, if it's you don't get grant funding, if it's like a deadline is in some way a fear-based motivator, right? Because you're worried about the fallout of not meeting that deadline. So I think it does prove as a motivational tool for a lot of people. But it's not the one we always want to name because it's not fun. It's not a fun motivator. And I think it's definitely motivating for me. Fear of whatever, fill in the blank. But I think my primary, it's probably pretty high, but another primary motivator for me, which certainly comes out of context, is knowing the purpose, knowing the why behind what I'm doing. And when I center that, it becomes a major motivator. When, I have had so much purpose in doing my dissertation and wanting to get this information out here and wanting to honor the stories of the people I interviewed, so on and so forth. The very negative below the line flip side of that is if I don't think it's a good why, I don't want to do it. Like, if I don't think there's a good motivation, someone gives me a task, and I've gotten into trouble with previous bosses in this way, where I push back against an assignment that's been given to me because I don't think it's worthwhile. I don't think it's a good enough why. And so it's an extreme motivator for things that I can get behind, that align with my values, that I understand the purpose and agree with the purpose. But when I don't agree with it, it can be incredibly unmotivating. And even something I push against whether or not it is worthwhile completing that task because I don't see merit in the motivation.
Well, it could even build resentment.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
Which I think, resentment has come up a lot lately in conversations that I've been having with teams and when it comes to engagement. And when mandates, and I use that in air quotes, mandates come out. Let's talk about return to work mandate. Okay. Resentment just builds like crazy because what's the why? It's not lack of understanding the why. People understand why there's a return to work policy, but they resent the why because they believe that they can show up just as productive, if not more so, and probably make a strong case for it.
Yeah.
But if the company says this is how the shit's going to go, what I notice, employees who aren't in alignment with the why will say, it was not explained to me. I don't understand the why. It doesn't make sense to me. Logically, and again, this is a great view that I have in being, in the stands and not in the arena on it. I do work from home if I'm not traveling.
Yeah.
So I don't have a return to office mandate, but I see what that's putting on people.
Yeah.
And what it's putting on managers who are not the decision makers, but have to...
are the decision executors.
Yes. And try to be the support and the encouragement. And, once again, management totally underrated. of all the complexities that come with that, because you are navigating humans, and humans are unpredictable and they're tricky and they're needy and they have resentment, and they also have really bizarre motivations and really different systems.
Yeah, and that's a good distinction, especially like, I think it's a lot easier and maybe more politically correct to say it wasn't explained to me why, rather than saying, I get why, but I don't agree with it and I don't like it. And that probably is, because when it boils down to it, return to office mandates mostly are due to capitalism, mostly are due to we're paying for a physical space, or we want more oversight and accountability and surveillance of your work. And it's easier to do that when we see you here. And this doesn't feel very, in many ways, respectful to most employees, right? But a company
and there is some great research around collaboration and how critical it is for teams. And I try to get in on all of the research around it, whether it's yes, this is a good thing, yes, this is not a good thing, and try to have a really broad scope about it. But I've gotten curious about that within me, Tess. If this was affecting me, would I be as open to the research that supported it?
Oh, no, absolutely.
So back to your motivation of, if I agree with it, fine. I'm all about it. If I don't agree with the why.
That's textbook human behavior, though, as we find information that supports our viewpoints. Confirmation bias. Yeah.
And we are living in a massive amount of that. And I get so curious about it. So back to the question around motivation. It is complex. And it is extraordinarily complicated. I want to know what you do when you don't agree with the why. What systems do you have in place then that will get you through? Rage?
I have a regular appointment in my local rage room. That's actually a thing. But what's unfortunate is I think my first system and I feel like, and I'm grateful, I think recent managers, or I guess my advisor, has been really open to my perspective. And I haven't always had managers that have, I think, respected my position and the way that I think. And so, like, I think my advisor, whenever I'm like, and I guess not unclear of the motivation, whenever I disagree with the motivation or don't like it, we talk through that. Like, I bring it up. I'm never shy about bringing it up. And I usually bring it from the less abrasive perspective of, like, help me understand more, like, clarify this. And I think, like, in some ways it comes from a place of disagreeing, but also I think when people put more words and clarify, it does help me see their perspective more. So it opens, coming from the perspective of help me understand the motivation, is from a place of wanting to make sense of it and wanting to get more data about why this is important. And it opens, like I said, the conversation to then speak from my perspective. And there have been many times in those conversations where we've come to it doesn't make sense to do right now, actually, or it doesn't, or actually, you're right, I hadn't thought about it that way. Let's try something different. And I think that's always been really helpful. So, like, my system is always to open dialogue. And usually when I get more information, even if I don't agree with it, if I get more information and whoever is in charge of me, whoever's my manager, advisor, still wants me to go and do that, even if I've shared my perspective and don't agree with it, then in many ways it needs to happen because they've asked me to and they're my manager. And I think that's an important element of motivation that we talked about, like fear being not so fun, but I think a major element of a motivating factor is power structures. And we haven't named that. Power structures, authority, capitalism, right? Who has power over you in terms of keeping you in that job, allowing you to bring home a paycheck, right? Like all these really practical things of work and the workplace, right? So in the end, a lot of my like big picture system, if I don't agree with something and we can't get to a same page, I know that I have to do it anyway because they have the power over me, right? And that seems really, it's not a fun thing to say, but they do. My advisor is my manager, is my direct report. She's the one who funds me. My manager in previous positions is my direct supervisor and has the ability to say whether or not I get a raise and whether or not they do my performance review, whether or not they can recommend me for promotion. Like, that's a reality. And those are motivating factors, right? Is who has the power to advance you or not advance you. So that would be like the overarching, but then the practical reality of what tools help me to still accomplish that look a lot like relying on that reality of power and who has power over me. But then I'm like what is the best, easiest, most clear way to accomplish this? And so I will say that sometimes I've through my dissertation specifically is a good example, and it wasn't something that I disagreed with motivationally, but it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of work to balance with working multiple part-time jobs on top of that, right? My funded job with the university, my teaching as an adjunct at multiple universities, and then my consulting work. So I had 3 part-time jobs on top of working on my dissertation, right? And so a technique that I have learned that I find really helpful, I have always been a bit of a binge writer. Like, I want to block out huge points of time to get things done. And I haven't always been able to do that in light of juggling other things. And so I was introduced to the Pomodoro timing technique in a workshop that I went to, and it's a timer that you set. The recommended is 20 minutes, but you can adjust what that timer is, and you go 20-minute sprints, 5 minutes of a break, 20-minute sprints, 5 minutes of a break. And it's really simple, but it comes down to the concept of I can do anything for 20 minutes. Like, I can be focused, I can get stuff done. Like, the workshop was like set goals and see what you accomplish, and then have a good idea of your workflow, specifically in terms of writing your dissertation. And I don't do that. I don't go that far. But what I find is that when I have this dedicated time to concentrate, when I go on Do Not Disturb, when I put a timer on, like, I do accomplish quite a bit, because I can stay focused for that amount of time. And usually what I end up doing, because I am a longer focus, longer worker kind of person, is I do a bunch of back-to-back sessions. I don't take breaks. I don't get up. I apologize in advance for my dog. But we're not in advance. I apologize for my dog barking in the background. But yeah, I guess that has been like a practical, especially when it's something like I've used it a lot for my dissertation, and that was where I learned about it, was through this dissertation workshop. But I found that it's really helpful for things that I don't feel motivated to do or don't agree with the purpose of, because I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't really want to do this. I don't agree with it. But if I have to do it anyway, can I do it in 20 minutes? Can I do it in 2 20-minute sessions? Like, yeah, most of the time it's a yes. So then just get it done. Make it happen, because the person who has power over you needs it to be done, even if you don't agree that it should be.
So you will love that and I'm going to draw this alignment, which is a stretch, but I'm going to anyway. The podcast that I listened to from the orthopedic surgeon, her advice was you can do anything for 30 seconds. And so I'm moving back into trying to run again and trying to be in more of that system of the early morning, getting out there, getting in the sunrise. And my knees have taken a turn. They just... I've got arthritis in both knees. I've been having a harder time with my right knee. I've got arthritis gel next to my bedside that I put on at night. I have an ice pack that I use specifically, but I, have been learning to ski, and I've been loving skiing, and that has its impact too. But her advice is you get on the treadmill, and you're on the treadmill learning for 45 minutes. Okay, podcast, whatever, you're learning for 45 minutes, you're distracted, and you're walking at a pretty brisk pace at a pretty, decent incline. And then at the end, you sprint for 30 seconds, and you do 4 sets of that, complete, cool down, and then sprint again. But her notion is you can do anything for 30 seconds. Yeah. And so I'm trying to get back into that. Not because someone scared me, Tess.
Yeah.
But I think because I have realized that I don't operate well if I am not in alignment body-wise. So this handy dandy little Aura ring that the kids got me for Christmas has so much data. Now I can either choose to look at it or I can choose to ignore it, but I'm choosing to look at it. And the first thing I do in the morning is I cannot wait to see what my sleep score is. I've become this nerd about my sleep.
That's so crazy.
But what I'm noticing is generationally, so are the young pups that I know.
Yeah.
They're like obsessed with getting a higher sleep score. And I'm like, this is a really interesting concept. I wouldn't have been able to tell you anything about my sleep when I was in my 20s because, well, I had 2 little kids, but also I didn't tie it to the data that now is in front of us. And what I know to be true, if I don't sleep well, I don't eat well, I don't exercise, it's one vicious cycle. But I'm learning because of this handy dandy app what indicates I'm going to have good sleep pattern.
Yeah.
And it's tied to exercise. 100% tied to exercise for me. So if I get out there and I get this movement in, I am more likely to sleep better. And cognitively, of course, there's all kinds of fear things about that when you get to 50 and you have, little blips in your memory, or you think, how in the hell am I going to get from this stage of life to the next stage of life if already I feel scatterbrained, or all the impacts of aging. I think the fear ping gets me into a place where I'm like, use the data.
Yeah.
Use the data. And I can because I know that I have somewhere in me some toughness. I can do anything for 30 seconds. And it feels empowering as to be able to get on a treadmill and just run my little heart out for 30 seconds. Yeah. Because it means my knees are still working and it means I can still get this done. Yeah. I did not start running, did not start any kind of exercise until I was in my early 30s. So I had just a completely different approach to that. And I have found it to be so nurturing for me in all aspects, emotionally, cognitively, in my systems. I have to be in movement. And it kind of takes me back to like 9-year-old me knew that. She totally knew what she needed. And so one of my systems I think often is to go back to that childhood self and say, what did she need? How is that true today?
That's good. What other, in your experience of not only reflecting on your own systems, but in talking to a lot of leaders and other people about their systems, like what are things we haven't talked about that people use that you might want to share with people who are listening? What are unique systems or interesting ones that seem to have been successful for other people that you could maybe share with us just to generate ideas?
They're so strengths related. I mean, it's fascinating to witness, right? When I'm talking with a leader and maybe I've been working with them for 6 months and we've talked about strengths quite a bit at the beginning, and then maybe we get away from that. If I go right to the systems piece and I hear what they're saying about their systems, I pull up their strengths report and say, okay, this makes sense. So if you have a leader who has high discipline, structure is going to be the system. If you have a leader who has more adaptability, flexibility and flow is going to be more in their system. I think, we talk a lot about strengths here. We talk a lot about those being patterns of behavior. I also think they are indicators of patterns of behavior, and indicators of motivation of behavior as much as just the, on repeat.
Makes sense. So if someone is like listening and they're like, I don't know what you mean by systems, or I haven't thought too much about it, or I don't know if I recognize the systems in my life, do they start with their strengths? Do they go to their strengths report? Do they start with reflecting on behavior? Like, where does one start to identify if they're not actively thinking about this?
The greatest gift you can give yourself is to be an observer of you. I encourage every single person to just take one day, and say, I am simply going to observe myself, notice, take notes about what I do, take notes about with honesty. How am I showing up? The other thing that you could do is do a 360 feedback, and you don't have to have someone necessarily do that on your behalf, although I would strongly recommend it for everybody. But you could ask someone you're close to, give me 3 words that describe me at my best, give me 3 words that describe me at my worst, and how does that impact you? And really take an assessment, an evaluation, an audit of how you're showing up. I think it's fascinating as to how we spend our time, and that's my word of the year, but just it's such an indicator of your priorities and your values. And if those things aren't in alignment, then you're the only person that can change that. You're the CEO of you. I have so many people that I work with that it's like they're waiting for permission from their manager or from their partner or spouse or from their kids or from this season or this work setting or whatever, that they need permission to make a change. No one can ever do it for you. And I read a quote yesterday from an interview with Phil Stutz. You remember he's the psychotherapist that, what's the actor's name who did the documentary on him called Stutz? He's funny. The actor is funny. Jonah
Hill?
Yes. He did a documentary because he worked with this psychotherapist, Phil Stutz. Anyway, I wrote down a quote. He said, you gain a superpower each time you approach whatever you're habitually avoiding.
That's good. That's a good quote.
And I thought about that in relationship to motivation. If people really took an audit on themselves, took time to say, what am I avoiding?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's a very different approach than what we typically do here. We're strengths focused, like take a look at your best practices, all of those things. But if you just asked yourself honestly and jotted down with that same sort of, I can do anything for 30 seconds, I can do anything for 20 minutes, with that same sort of honesty with yourself, what am I avoiding?
Yeah.
I think people can get curious about what's getting in the way of their motivations, and if we don't have that piece first, we really can't get to the motivation, because there's always going to be that might be a little baby block, it might be a big fat rock block, but what are you avoiding?
It's a great question.
I avoid a lot of things, and maybe that's why the fear, and I appreciate you naming that fear motivates me. I don't like feeling hard things. I don't think anybody does, by the way. But I am learning through EMDR and learning through some really hard work on revisiting my childhood self. I started creating stories as a kid in my head in order to avoid feeling, which has led to me being a pretty good storyteller.
Yeah.
That came from a trauma response.
Yeah.
And most of us operate in that regard, whether we name it or not. But what I was avoiding was actually feeling. So if I told myself a story that made it look positive and good, and, I'll use an easy example. Like the movie Annie came out when I was like 6-7 years old. And it was great timing because, 6-7 years old and you're figuring out you're adopted and everything that goes with that. So I created this magical story about my biological parents, that they were actors and they had to leave me behind. It was like my very first life hack learning was to create a story that worked for my brain. That is a system test.
Yeah.
Healthy or not, that is a
system.
system.
Yep.
So what I would recommend to people is to get damn honest with yourself and ask yourself what you're avoiding. And then you can start getting to the understanding of your motivation and the understanding of your systems.
That's awesome.
No one knows that it's going to turn into a therapy session when they get...
I feel like they do at this point. Are you kidding me?
Do they? I hope so. I hope so. Maybe we should put like one of those little trigger warnings at the beginning of the
trigger warning.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
but there's some great. I mean, there's some stuff coming out right now that I think is really powerful about how hard we work at not being honest with ourselves.
oh yeah. I love that. That's great. So, action items for listeners is first to get honest with yourself by answering the question, what are you avoiding? Then think through what motivates you. And then what systems do you have in place? Feels good? Okay. Wow. I just love our conversations. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to episode 123 of Genn and Millie. If you enjoyed today's conversation, consider sharing this episode with a friend. To interact with us and share your responses to the questions we posed, give us a follow on Instagram at Genn and Millie. That's at GENNANDMILLIE. Until next time.